each of you for joining today's session. Many of you will be aware of the direct reference to the victims and survivors of nuclear weapons in the TPNW through sections 6 and 7. Though this is less explicit in the NPT framework, it is vital for us to keep the profound and devastating repercussions of nuclear weapons at the forefront of our minds during a time when the nuclear threat are once again present in global discourse. In negotiating the non-proliferation process, we must account for the impact of nuclear weapons across their entire life cycle, from development, testing, detonation, all the way to disposal, and stay acutely aware of their long-term impacts. This includes the destruction of the environment, human health, economic outcomes, and communities as a whole, a price that continues to be paid by countless innocent people across the world. For Kazakhstan, this is a present and ongoing reality where over 1.5 million have been impacted by the 450 nuclear tests that have been conducted, totaling an atmospheric explosion power that is 2,500 times more than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The impact of these tests has been unfathomable. This session aims to spotlight the reality of these numbers that I've shared with you till now, and the many diverse stories of the victims of these tests, hoping to pay homage to the lives impacted through first-person perspectives, and to urge the international community to concretize the dream of nuclear disarmament. To this end, we especially welcome Mr. Dmitry Veselov, a third-generation victim of these nuclear tests, whose story helps to emphasize the catastrophic and long-term consequences of these inhumane weapons.
We should also pay attention on how international cooperation can be mobilized for funding projects, technical equipment, knowledge sharing, capacity building, and especially the setup of the proposed international cluster within the framework of TPNW. In November this year, the meeting of the TPNW state parties is scheduled to take place in New York.
In 2019, through the gracious arrangement of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan, I visited the former semi-parachute nuclear test site for the first time. Standing in that vast wilderness, I was deeply pained by the heart-wrenching thought of the countless people who suffered and continue to suffer the effects of the nuclear radiation as a result of the over 450 nuclear tests conducted in the area. The shock and distress I felt at that time are etched in my memory. As you know, the voices of the Hibakusha of Hiroshima and Nagasaki played a pivotal role in the adoption of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. However, the threat of the global Hibakusha, the numerous individuals who have been exposed to radiation through nuclear testing and uranium mining, their plight has not received sufficient recognition. We must not allow ourselves to be swayed by state-centric logic and arguments for the dangerous game of nuclear deterrence. Rather, we must keep at the forefront of our mind the terrible anguish of all those who lost their lives, were injured, or otherwise have suffered the effects of nuclear weapons. Their cries continue to echo across the globe. We must ensure that these individual tragedies are never forgotten. To do so would be to allow ourselves to be led down a path of dehumanization and away from the goal of nuclear disarmament. The SGI has worked together with ICANN to carry out grassroots awareness raising activities on the humanitarian impact and risks of nuclear weapons. We are firmly committed to continuing these efforts while raising awareness about the struggle of global hibakusha, providing support to all nuclear victims, and advancing environmental restoration efforts. So long as the risk of nuclear weapon use persists, we must never lose the consciousness of the violent threat and affront to our humanity that these weapons pose. Together, let us send a resolute message to the world that we will not tolerate the existence of nuclear weapons, and let us continue to forge a path towards their abolition. Thank you very much.
Now, I'd like to introduce the trailer of a film launching in November at the second MSP, which is the result of tireless efforts to document the first-person perspective and lives of the victims of nuclear testing in Kazakhstan. The title of the film is I Want to Live On, The Untold Stories from the Polygon.
Я здесь сегодня просмотрел разные водородные, все испытывали здесь. На нас, как говорится.
Да я сам помню, это нас выгоняли из школы, блин, трясло, блин, как ужасно.
Смотрим, вот такое вот растет. И мы стоим и смотрели вот этот гриб.
Я именно пострадавший в третьем поколении. У меня врожденное генетическое заболевание, синдром Шейдхауэра, Мари Сэмптон. У человека отсутствует полностью ключица. Ну, давайте я вам покажу. Дело в том, что у меня незаращение шейного позвонка.
Положено.
Таковой инвалидности я не имею, потому что вроде как мне в ней отказано. Потому что вроде как руки и ноги на месте, вроде как элементарные вещи делать могу. Это, давайте оставим это на совесть. Пример с конкретными реальными цифрами, с конкретными реальными судьбами, он бы предостерег другие государства от разработок ядерного оружия, его испытаний и тем более применения. Да, я понимаю, что наше государство очень молодое. Да, оно будет всегда моложе меня. Я живу сейчас, и я хочу жить дальше.
Хотелось бы поблагодарить постоянную миссию Казахстана в Вене, Soka Gakkai International, Центр политики и безопасности за предоставленную возможность выступить здесь.
I would like to thank the Permanent Mission of Kazakhstan in Vienna, Soka Gakkai International, Center for International Security and Policy for the opportunity to introduce myself here.
Я родился в городе Семипалатинск, Казахская ССР, в 1976 году. Он находится в 100 километрах от полигона по прямой линии. В настоящее время проживаю там же, практически безвыездно. Работаю в службе такси.
I was born in Semipalatinsk in Kazakh Soviet Republic in 1976. The city is located 100 kilometers from the former nuclear test site if measured in a straight line. Currently I live there almost without a break and I work in a taxi service.
Моя мама также родилась в городе Семей. У меня есть сестра Светлана, работает врачом скорой помощи. Бабушка, дедушка, к сожалению, уже ушли. Дедушка пожил хорошо, ему больше 90 лет было.
My mother also was born in Semey. I have a sister Svetlana who works as an emergency doctor. My grandmother and grandfather unfortunately already left. Grandfather lived well, he was over 90 years old.
Бабушку я не застал. Она умерла от онкологии в 1975 году. Бабушка родилась в Семипалатинске, а дедушка переехал в Семипалатинск еще до начала испытаний.
I didn't see my grandmother, she died of oncology in 1975. My grandmother was born in Semipalatinsk and grandfather moved to Semey before the beginning of nuclear tests.
Так как моя семья проживала рядом с полигоном, то на мне это тоже отразилось. Я являюсь пострадавшим от полигона в третьем поколении. У меня генетическое заболевание, которое не позволяет мне жить полноценной жизнью и которое будет передаваться из поколения в поколение. К К сожалению, это так.
Since my family lived near the test site, this has also affected me. I'm a third generation survivor from nuclear tests. I have a genetic disease that prevents me from living a full life and will be passed down from generation to generation. Unfortunately, it is so.
У меня черепно-ключичный дизостоз. Он характеризуется тем, что у человека полностью отсутствуют ключицы. Точнее, с одной стороны, они вроде бы есть, а точнее, с одной стороны, отростки есть, а с другой стороны, они никуда не прикреплены. То есть руки, они вроде бы есть, а сделать ими какую-либо серьезную работу не представляется возможным, поскольку нет прямого физического рычага. И руки держатся только на мышцах и связках.
I have cranioclavicular dysostosis. It is characterized by the fact that the person has no clavicles. More precisely, there are outgrowths on one side, but on the other side they are not attached anywhere. So I have hands, but it is not possible to do any serious work with them, since there is no direct physical leverage. And the hands are held only by muscles and ligaments.
Также у меня аномалия развития костей черепа, а также подверженность заболеваниям бронхолегочной системы.
I also have anomalies in the development of the bones of the skull, as well as susceptibility to diseases of the bronchopulmonary system.
У меня все крупные суставы имеют признаки острого артроза, вне зависимости от того, насколько они нагружены. Я, допустим, не очень много хожу, но у меня все равно артроз ниже их конечностей.
All my large joints have signs of acute arthrosis, regardless of physical activity. For example, I don't walk very much, but I still have arthrosis of the lower extremities.
Ставить импланты, поскольку зубы продолжают расти. Мне говорят, подожди, пока они дорастут. А они продолжают расти, хотя мне уже 46 лет.
I have very bad teeth. They already grow damaged. Because of this, no one undertakes to put implants, as the teeth continue to grow. Doctors tell me to wait until they grow up, but they continue to grow, although I am 46 years old.
Также у меня недоращение шейного позвонка. И после того, как я долгое время нахожусь в вертикальном положении, сидя или стоя,
I also have a non-fusion of the cervical vertebrae, and after I have been in an upright position for a long time, sitting or standing, the vessels supplying the brain and nerve endings begin to compress in me, and I need to take a horizontal position. That is 4, 5, 6 hours. This is in principle the limit for me. It is impossible to withstand more.
как вариант, частое ношение воротника шанса. Но это не спасет, потому что тогда мышцы атрофируются. Как последствие, я вообще ничего не смогу сделать.
As an option, this is the frequent wearing of shan's collar, but this will not save because then the muscles will atrophy. As a result, I won't be able to do anything at all.
Вообще, конечно, постоянно приходится беречься. Ничего тяжелого не поднимать, ни в коем случае. Иначе идет растяжение связок и сухожилий, и рука потом начинает просто болтаться как плеть. Вплоть до того, что потом вилку или ложку поднять невозможно.
In general, of course, I have to constantly be aware. Do not lift anything heavy in any case. Otherwise, there is a stretching of the ligaments, tendons, and then the hand begins to simply hang out like a whip, up to the point that then the fork or spoon cannot be lifted.
В 2015 году я был признан пострадавшим от воздействия ионизирующих излучений.
In 2015, I was recognized as a victim of exposure to ionizing radiation.
Из общения с врачами никто не смог дать однозначного ответа на вопрос, передастся ли мое заболевание моим детям. Являясь ответственным человеком, я не хочу, чтобы мои дети страдали от этой болезни.
From communication with doctors, no one could give me an ambiguous answer to the question, will my disease be transmitted to my children? As a responsible person, I do not want my children to suffer from this disease.
В силу этого у меня сознательно нет детей, и это мой выбор, что одновременно является самой большой болью в моей жизни, которую никакие льготы или компенсации исправить не смогут. Радость отцовства. Разве что медицина сделает серьезный шаг вперед и позволит мне иметь здоровых детей. Но и при таком раскладе есть сомнения, так как данная процедура будет стоить очень дорого.
Because of this, I deliberately do not have children, and this is my choice. This is also the biggest pain in my life, which no benefits or compensation can fix, the joy of fatherhood. Unless medicine takes a serious step forward and allows me to have healthy children. But even in this situation, there is doubt, since the cost of this procedure will be very expensive.
Республика Казахстан в силу расположения на ее территории уже закрытого ядерного полигона, наряду с Японией и рядом островных государств Тихого океана, является одной из самых проблемных в плане последствий от испытаний или применения ядерного оружия.
The Republic of Kazakhstan, due to the location of the already closed Semipalatinsk nuclear test site on its territory, along with Japan and a number of Pacific island states, is one of the most problematic in terms of consequences of testing or use of nuclear weapons.
В государстве предприняты определенные шаги по поддержке лиц, пострадавших от последствий полигона, а именно профилактические осмотры у врачей, дополнительно оплачиваемые работодателям отпуска, лица, признанные инвалидами, приравненные льготы к участникам Второй мировой войны, получают специальное государственное пособие, предусмотренная единовременная выплата.
Certain steps have been taken in Kazakhstan to support people affected by the consequences from nuclear tests, namely preventive examination by doctors, additional vaccination paid by employer, vacations paid by employer. Persons recognized as disabled are equated to the benefits with the participants of the Second World War. Receive a special state allowance. A lump sum payment is provided.
На вопрос о лекарствах, точнее их покупке, следует пояснить, что я не являюсь инвалидом и самостоятельно оплачиваю медицинскую страховку. Так как моя страховка стандартная, по ней не предусмотрены консультации и профильные профессуры, ну и, естественно, лекарства мне тоже не положены. Стоит отметить отдельную благодарность врачам. Все-таки они стараются поддерживать мое здоровье на должном уровне.
To question about medicines or rather their purchase, it should be clarified that I am not officially disabled and not recognized officially as a disabled person and pay for medical insurance on my own. Since my insurance is standard, it does not provide for consultations of specialized professors. And of course, I am not entitled to medicine either. It is worth noting a special gratitude to the doctors. After all, they try to maintain my health at the proper level.
В нашем государстве упомянутым законом положены дополнительные дни к отпуску, оплачиваемые работодателем. Работая водителем такси, я являюсь индивидуальным предпринимателем, то есть работодателем самому себе. У кого мне спрашивать дополнительный отпуск? У самого себя. И заплатить за это дополнительный налог за то, что я не работаю.
In our state, the law mentioned above provides for additional days for vacation, paid at the expense of the employer. Working as a taxi driver, I am an individual entrepreneur, employer to myself. Whom should I ask for additional leave? From myself? And pay extra tax for not working?
На моем примере мы видим, что государство, декларировав помощь, переложило ее на плечи самих пострадавших и их работодателей, не компенсируя их затраты как-либо, например, через механизм налоговых вычетов.
In my example, we see that the state, having declared assistance, shifted it onto the shoulders of the victims themselves and their employers without compensating their costs in any way, for example, through the mechanism of tax deductions.
Какие-либо существенные льготы положены лишь инвалидам, а мне в получении группы инвалидности отказано, несмотря на то, что только в течение этого года я не мог выполнять рабочие функции свыше 140 дней. Данное решение государственных органов принято вопреки признанию существенных функциональных нарушений системы организма специализированным институтом.
Any significant benefits are provided only to disabled people, and I was denied a disability group, despite the fact that only during this year I could not work for more than 140 days. This decision of the state bodies was made despite by the recognition of significant functional disorders of the body systems by a specialized institute.
Ну а специальное государственное пособие пострадавшим. Отвечу, Выплата существенная, ежемесячная, но она положена лишь тем, кто признан инвалидом, либо одному из членов семьи лица, умершего от заболевания, вызванных ионизирующим излучением.
Well, what about the special state allowance for the victims? I will answer. The payment is substantial, monthly, but is due only to those who are recognized as disabled or to one of the family members of a person who died from diseases caused by ionizing radiation.
Что остается живым вроде меня, спросите вы? У меня нет ответа. Мы оставлены наедине с проблемами.
Well, what about the living like me, you ask? I have no answer. We are left alone with problems.
Являясь достаточно молодым государством, Республика Казахстан столкнулась с очень тяжелым наследием. Многие жители региона страдают от различных заболеваний, вызванных, как у меня, генетическими изменениями, так и остаточной радиацией.
Being a fairly young state, the Republic of Kazakhstan faced a very difficult legacy. Many people in the region suffer from various diseases caused both by genetic changes and by residual radiation.
В частности, сейчас в больнице Санкт-Петербурга борется с очень тяжелой формой рака молодая девочка из города Семей. Лечение в израильской клинике, к сожалению, не принесло желаемого результата. Разве она виновата в том, что родилась в регионе, прилегающем к испытательному полигону?
In particular, a young girl from Semey is currently struggling with a very severe form of cancer in St. Petersburg Hospital. Treatment in an Israeli clinic unfortunately did not bring the desired result. Is it her fault that she was born in the region next to the nuclear test site?
Или еще один случай. Вблизи испытательного полигона на угольном разрезе Каражира отец и сын с небольшим интервалом заболели лейкемией. К сожалению, сын уже скончался, а отец продолжает лечиться в онкологическом диспансере. Разве это не является показателем опасности?
Or another case, near the former test site at the Karajira coal mine, the father and son fell ill with leukemia with a short interval. Unfortunately, the son has already died. The father continues to be treated at the oncological dispensary. Isn't that a sign of danger?
Недавно Мажилисом Республики Казахстан был принят закон о Семипалатинской зоне ядерной безопасности, некоторые положения которого вызывают определенные вопросы, в частности с переводом земель для сельского хозяйства.
Recently, the Parliament of the Republic of Kazakhstan adopted a law on the Semipalatinsk nuclear safety zone, some provisions of which cause certain concerns, in particular with the transfer of land for agriculture.
Регулярно в средствах массовой информации в той или иной форме появляются упоминания о ядерном щите России. Конечно, являясь государством с самыми многочисленными ядерными зарядами, оно очевидно забыло, за счет чьей жизни ковался этот щит, отгородилось от проблем жителей, прилегающих к полигону регионов.
Regularly in media, in one form or another, there are references to the nuclear shield of Russia. Of course, being the state with the most numerous nuclear weapons, it obviously forgot at the expense of whose lives this shield was forged, fenced off from the problems of people of the regions next to the test site.
Благодаря усилиям правительства Республики Казахстан, международных организаций, неправительственных организаций, неоднократно поднимался вопрос о помощи жителям региона, пострадавшим от испытаний, не только прямым жертвам, но и пострадавшим в отдаленных временных рамках, последующие поколения. Однако и до настоящего времени ничего существенного не изменилось.
Thanks to the efforts of the government of Kazakhstan, international organizations and various non-governmental organizations, the issue of assistance to the people of the region affected by nuclear tests, not only direct victims but also those affected in remote time frames, further generations, has been repeatedly raised. However, nothing has changed significantly so far.
Свыше миллиона жителей Республики Казахстан в той или иной мере нуждаются в признании и поддержке из-за Семипалатинского испытательного ядерного полигона.
Over 1 million people of Kazakhstan are in need of recognition and support in a way or another because of the former Semipalatinsk nuclear test site.
Ну а что дальше? Лично для меня вспомнить что моя фамилия Веселов, и не стоит отчаиваться, жизнь продолжается. А для остального мира пусть моя история послужит примером опасности ядерного оружия. А тем, кто говорит о маленькой бомбе или ограниченной ядерной войне, укором. Может, кто-то и услышит мой тихий голос. Спасибо.
Well, what's next? For me personally, to remember that my last name is Veselov, which in English means joyful. And do not despair, life goes on. And for the rest of the world, let my story serve as an example of the dangers of nuclear weapons. And for those who talk about small bomb or a limited nuclear war with a reproach, maybe someone will hear my quiet voice. Thank you.
I'll speak a bit about the global impacts of nuclear weapons, including recent resources where you can learn more about these impacts, as well as what's being done to work to address these on the international stage through the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in 15 countries around the world, including Kazakhstan, but truly in many different regions around the world. In addition to the harm from nuclear weapons use and testing, nuclear weapons have also had humanitarian impacts through their production, including uranium mining as well as productions in laboratories. Widespread harm beyond just impacts on physical health, including mental health impacts, socioeconomic effects, displacement, as well as cultural harm across communities. Testing in the United States, just in one part of the US, ultimately spread to the entire contiguous 48 states, as well as to neighboring countries. In addition, I can highly recommend this book, Nuclear Bodies, The Global Hibakusha, which provides a really thorough, comprehensive account of radioactive contamination, truly around the world, even arguing that the decades of nuclear testing should be considered a limited nuclear war given the widespread harm that it caused. In addition, I can highly recommend this book, Nuclear Bodies, The Global Hibakusha, which provides a really thorough, comprehensive account of radioactive contamination, truly around the world, even arguing that the decades of nuclear testing should be considered a limited nuclear war given the widespread harm that it caused globally. Next slide, please. I'd also like to introduce a website that ICANN put together and launched last year, the first meeting of states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We hope that it's a useful resource combining information about the impacts of nuclear testing around the world with the powerful stories of survivors, including Dimitri's story, as well as some information about their advocacy for justice nationally and internationally. I should have put the website link, but it's nucleartestimpacts.org. And my colleague Lucero actually has the website pulled up on an iPad, so if you find her, you can explore the resource yourself. Next slide. But essentially, what we do is in the website have a marker for every single test that was conducted around the world, sometimes with just very basic information about who conducted the test, where it was, what the date was. But for some of the test sites where there were multiple tests, we also worked with scientists to produce a amalgamation of a lot of the research about the subsequent impacts, health and beyond of testing at that site. So here's one example. Next slide. In addition, next to that, the kind of compilation of academic research about the tests, we also have a very important source of information about tests, which is the direct words of survivors through video interviews as well as written stories. So here's another example of that, and you can listen to the video if you go to the website. Next slide. And then finally, we also try to include, with survivors' permission, of course, their work to advocate for justice. In many countries, there's work at the national level to receive forms of compensation or recognition, as well as work within the international sphere. Next slide, please. So, moving to the international sphere, this is in Articles 6 and 7 of the treaty, which require age and gender sensitive assistance without discrimination, encompassing this broad frame of harm, as well as taking steps towards environmental remediation. Often when we talk about Articles 6 and 7, we talk about them together because while it's the primary responsibility of states with affected populations or affected areas to provide assistance, there's also an obligation under Article 7 for all states to provide assistance when they're in a position to do so to those affected states. And there's also, of course, the potential with an international framework to mobilize additional resources beyond just affected states to address this harm. So there has been a lot of work already towards implementing these articles. We saw this first at the first meeting of states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which took place here in Vienna about a year ago in June. So since then, in the preceding year, there's been a lot of progress. The working group to address these efforts has been led by Kazakhstan and Kiribati, and they've discussed and had really productive work regarding the obligations in the action plan on producing initial assessments of harm, creating national plans to begin to implement their obligations, having discussions on a potential format of an international trust fund that could support this work, discussing how states can report on their work in a voluntary format, as well as how to be more inclusive, particularly of affected communities, thinking about the gender-sensitive provisions, and more. So it's been quite a broad and comprehensive body of work in the past year, leading up to the next meeting of states parties, which will take place this November. There's a lot of avenues for all states to engage on this work, and I'll try to wrap up briefly. Including following the really substantive work that's ongoing within the TPNW process. At ICANN, we've even established a website that provides information about what's happening in each working group, so all states and civil society can continue to follow along. Other states can engage with all stakeholders. They can support additional research or humanitarian or community work on these areas, and they can welcome this really important new initiative to advance victim assistance and environmental remediation in the TPNW, even in other fora, in the NPT general debate, for example. By joining the TPNW and actively supporting the work there, not only to, of course, eliminate the role of nuclear weapons, eliminate nuclear weapons, but to proactively address the harm that's been caused by nuclear weapons use and testing around the world.
This concludes the presentation part of this session, and now it is time to move on to the question and answer section.
Vice, IPN News. My questions actually go to Dimitri because we had an opportunity to talk last year, and very interesting that something happened in the regarding of your medical assistant.
В министерстве, профильном министерстве, изменилось.
For now, nothing.
Nothing changed.
Nothing changed, yeah.
As you are not recognized as a disabled person in Kazakhstan, and you are basically recognized as the victim of the nuclear radiation, does it change something, or can this basically two qualification of your state go together?
Нет признания пострадавших от ядерных.
Recognizing as a survivor from nuclear test does not help to be recognized as a disabled person, because the recognition as a survivor is given by medical institute. The recognition as a disabled person is given by a social institution, and they are not interconnected.
Who will follow this question? Although I'm not directly responsible for that, but I will follow in order to address this issue, this particular issue.
I think as I heard, solution will be actually that the Ministry of Social Affairs and the Ministry of Health work together and qualify the recognition. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you for that question. Next question is over here, and then this one afterwards.
A question and comment for our colleague from Soka Gakkai International. So I think this will be the first time that we have an NPT meeting on the anniversaries of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which is next Monday and Wednesday. So this should be work. I would propose that Soka Gakkai and also Kazakhstan propose that on both days the NPT meeting hold a minute of silence. Since this will be the first time, as I mentioned, to repeat myself, that an NPT conference is being held on the anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, to get some recognition there, because the discussions last week and this week and next week in the NPT context are very antiseptic. The human being is taken out of the equation. It's all about international security, it's about deterrence, and so on. And so we need to bring this human element back and in a sense resist the efforts from countries that possess nuclear weapons, that countries that rely on the protection of nuclear weapons through allied systems, that this is not an antiseptic discussion. Human beings and the welfare of citizens of the world and the environment is at stake, and we need to make more progress. And particularly in these times where we are in a time of enhanced international conflict, arms control and arms reduction is not a reward to the adversary. Arms control and arms reduction is in one's own national security policy. So not talking to those who need to reduce nuclear weapons is a self-inflicted wound.
まず、お答えにならないかもしれませんが、まず今日のようなセッションをカザフさんが一緒にやっていただいたことに私は心から感謝をしています。
So first of all, I'd like to take this opportunity to give my heartfelt gratitude for Kazakhstan, who actually gave this kind of gathering and this opportunity. I'm very, very grateful to this session, and I'm not probably answering the question that.
先ほども話出てきましたけど、TPNW の6条7条の作業部会のチェアをカザフスタンやキリバチのような国がリードしているということも素晴らしい挑戦だと思っています。
I'm also very impressed with the Kazakhstan and Kiribati is actually taking the lead for the working group for the Article 6 and 7 of TPNW. That is a great work.
ある意味で100万人以上の核被害者を抱えているというのはカザフスタン自身も私は被害者だと思います。そういう意味では国としてこの被害のある人たちをどうやってサポートしていくのか、これからさらに挑戦をされるものと私は信じています。
So actually having the more than 1 million victims of the nuclear testing in Kazakhstan, so that means the Kazakhstan country itself is a victim of this nuclear testing. And I'm certain that the Kazakhstan is going to put more efforts to work out how to support those victims in their own country.
今日はデビトリーさんという方が来て、このような議論の場で私たちは大きなインパクトを受けながら、改めてこの核兵器の問題をさまざまに今思いを巡らしている最中だと思います。
So today that we feel really grateful and honored to receive Mr. Dorothy coming all the way to attend this session and giving a very big impact for all of us. And we are all, I think, thinking of what nuclear weapons can do and the detonation of the nuclear testing actually giving what kind of effect to the humanity.
で、トニーさんのお話をこの場で一緒にカザフスタンの外務省のリーダーのお一人が私たちと一緒に聞いていただいているということも私は意味が大きいことだと思っています。
I also feel it's very significant to have the presence of the Kazakh Foreign Ministry's one of the top leaders here together with us to listen to the testimony of Mr. Dr.
私たちは日本において一貫して核廃絶を目指す運動体として長年歴史を刻んできました。
We have been working for the nuclear abolition, nuclear disarmament for long years.
その根本はまさに人間を中心にものを考えるというそういう挑戦でありました。
It has been the challenge to put the humanity in the center of this campaign and activities for the abolition of nuclear weapons.
私自身は1970年代に当時の創価学会の仲間たちとボランティアで約3000人の戦争被害者や被爆者の人たちの聞き取り運動をやって80冊からなる本を出し続けました。
Actually, in 1970s, together with my colleagues of the Soka Gakkai, and we have actually interviewed more than 3,000 victims and also the survivors of nuclear weapons, as well as the Second World War, and we actually compiled those testimonies, experiences to the more than 80 volumes of books.
冒頭でも申し上げましたけれども、私たちは人間の痛みを真ん中に置かない運動は、それは本当の、必要とされる運動にならないという自覚で挑戦をしているつもりです。
As I said earlier on, I think we feel, I think the human element, and especially the sufferings of the humanity and the pain of individuals should be the center of all initiatives and the movement. Unless we place the humanity and the human minds in the center, that's work and does not contribute to human society.
そういう決意であることを述べてお答えさせていただきます。
So instead of probably not answering directly, but that is how we look at this our movement, and instead of this, I had to give my answer.
Thank you so much, Dimitri. It's a pleasure to see you, and you are an important player in our work towards eradicating nuclear weapons from the planet. So thank you for your courage and for your honesty and your experience that you've shared with us. My question is this, the talk about the International Trust Fund, and I think this is important, compensation, recognition, awareness of the victims and survivors of the use of nuclear testing. Where are we in that, and where does the role of the perpetrators of these nuclear testings play a role in contributing to such trust funds? Kazakhstan was not, let's say the government of Kazakhstan was not responsible for this nuclear testing, it was the Soviet Union. When we look at the nuclear testings in Algeria, it was the French who did it. And what is even worse about what happened to Algeria, because I'm from the Middle East Treaty Organization, so we focus a lot on the Middle East and the French nuclear testing in Algeria. And what is crazy actually is that once Algeria gained its independence, the French still negotiated to be able to continue using their military bases and those nuclear testing sites for another 5 to 6 years. So this is irresponsibility on a completely mad level. So my question is this: where are we with International Trust Fund? Where's the money? Who's going to pay for it? And how are we going to get this money to the right survivors? Number two, how do we allow for the opportunity for those perpetrators and those governments who possess nuclear weapons to show their responsibility and their obligations to contribute to such a fund and open up their archives and secret files, which then give us the information and the data on where these testings have happened? And finally, I would love to invite Dimitri to join some of our work to bring a united voice of survivors from Kazakhstan to Algeria to the Marshall Islands to across the world, that we can speak with one voice and really bring this awareness to a level that is meaningful at a time when we are facing an increasingly dangerous cliff in terms of a possibility for future victims such as yours that had to go through becoming widespread in their billions.
Thank you. I think, Alicia, it would be great if you would share some insights on this question. Thank you.
Sure, my pleasure. And I do encourage you also to check out on ICANN's website, we have a special page dedicated to the intersessional work, where we have summaries of a lot of the discussions that have gone on within the working group, as well as resources, which kind of follows in more detail a lot of these discussions around the International Trust Fund that have taken place among TPNW states parties, but with the active participation of civil society, including ICANN and affected communities, which we're very grateful to, and it's a really unique setup and process in international fora. But in essence, the discussions have kind of focused on what could be kind of the guidelines and framework for an international trust fund, with really serious considerations of what kind of projects could be supported by an international trust fund, who could donate, what could be the mechanisms for dispersing funds that are contributed to an international trust fund, and what are the existing precedents. There was a paper that was contributed by Harvard Law School, the Harvard Law School program on armed conflict and civilian production, looking at 10 existing international trust funds and drawing lessons from that for how a TPNW trust fund could be set up. So there's been really serious and substantive considerations. ICANN has also produced, in consultation with our partners, with certainly with affected communities that are part of ICANN, we've produced a set of recommendations about how we'd like to see an international trust fund established, including allowing for broad contributions by as many countries, international organizations as possible, while of course retaining ownership of the fund within the TPNW, to ensure that it can receive as much funds and as much support as possible. It seems, there should be a report on these discussions for the second meeting of states parties, where there'll be more information about what has been achieved within the first year. But I think there's broad agreement that it's important to establish a fund that can be supported and that can be successful. And so it might still take a bit more time to decide kind of all of these different determinations of what should go into establishing a successful fund. But you can read more about those deliberations and conversations and all the research and resources that have gone into this particular topic within the TPNW on our website, or we're happy to talk about it more. I would say, I think certainly we agree that clearly the countries that have committed these atrocities should be held accountable. And there is an article in Article 7 of the TPNW, I think it's Article 6, Paragraph 6 of Article 7. It is noted that states parties that have used or tested nuclear weapons should be responsible for assisting affected states. So once those countries join the TPNW, they do have this obligation there. But I think, this was said during the negotiations. I'm sorry, I don't remember which country said it or what the exact quote was. But essentially that if you witnessed a crime and someone shot somebody else or harmed somebody else in the street, would you run after the perpetrator and drive them back to the scene of the crime before providing assistance to that harmed person? No, you would seek to help that person in any way that you can with the assistance of the community, instead of waiting for that person to take responsibility and take accountability, and put pressure on them, of course, to do so. But I think that's some of the kind of rationale behind the TPNW of providing a framework of solidarity for states to provide support to gather more resources for affected communities without having to wait for these countries who have committed these crimes to own up and be accountable for their actions, while putting pressure on them and calling on them to do so.
Thank you for your question. I just wanted to add some few thoughts to the information provided by ECA. There are no easy solutions. For example, there are two lines of thought regarding the possible source of donation for the TPNW Trust Fund. The first is that you take money from nuclear states responsible for nuclear testing and give those money to victims of nuclear testing. The problem here is that they can set conditions for their assistance. And the second problem is that it is can be considered as a justification of their action. They organized nuclear testing and then they contributed to the nuclear fund. Now they are clear. They are justified. The second line of thought, of course, is that we need to limit funding only to those states who are members or parties to TPNW. This is more a straightforward approach, but the problem in this situation is that if you look at the list of TPNW states, they are not rich. They have modest resources, limited resources, but this is still in the process of discussion among states parties. And the trust fund is a priority for Kazakhstan's chairmanship in the TPNW. What we are planning to do is to work actively on modalities of the trust fund and try to finalize and to adopt a relevant decision by 2025 during the year when we plan to hand over chairmanship to another country. And hopefully there are a lot of ideas, a lot of suggestions. You mentioned the report by Harvard University, support from academic community, support of course from member states. We will try to materialize those ideas into very concrete things.
As we come to the end of this session, I'd like to bring it back to the very real first-hand accounts of these experiences. And Dimitri, I have a final question for you as we end the session. At this present moment, as the nuclear threat comes back into the global discourse, particularly in the region where you are living, what impact does that have on you and your community in terms of the conversations that are happening, how that feels, the psychological impact? And what is it that you'd like to say as a final message about what's happening now and what you'd like to happen in the future?
Действительно, сейчас очень сложная ситуация. У нас два очень серьезных ядерных соседа. Это не может не отражаться на сознании граждан.
Indeed, it's a difficult situation now, especially that we're neighboring two nuclear weapon states, and it cannot be influenced on consciousness of citizens in Kazakhstan.
Происходит процесс объединения граждан в определенные общественные объединения с целью озвучивания опасности, донесения для мирового сообщества опасности для тех, кто принимает решения, опасности применения ядерного оружия.
And people now are uniting in groups and movements to send a message of the danger of the decisions the people, the politicians make, and the danger of the possibility of nuclear war.
Естественно, мне хотелось бы, чтобы ядерного оружия не было. Но на данном этапе мировое сообщество отвергает, имеется в виду ядерная девятка, отвергает эту идею. Поэтому надо прилагать усилия к тому, чтобы ядерное оружие оказалось вне закона.
So, of course, indeed, I wish that there would be no nuclear weapons at all. But unfortunately, international community, particularly, I mean, 9 nuclear weapon states denies this opportunity, and I think we should take every effort to end this nuclear era.
Я так думаю, мою точку зрения разделяют практически все пострадавшие в Казахстане.
And I think that my point of view shared with all other survivors in Kazakhstan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that exactly at the final moment ends the panel today. Thank you for attending, and we look forward to interacting through this rest of this week and the next.